Knock at 2:45. I never used to be the kind of person who paid attention to the quiet hours of the night. I slept through storms, through neighbors fighting, through the distant hum of traffic and the occasional wail of sirens cutting through the city. Silence never unsettled me, and darkness was just another backdrop, like the closing of a theater curtain. That changed when the knocking began, always at the same time, always at 2:45 in the morning. It started subtly, like an accidental disturbance. The first night I barely noticed it, a hollow tapping that I thought was the wind pressing against loose siding or an old pipe shuddering somewhere deep inside the walls. My apartment was aged, the kind of building where the floorboards carried a memory of every step and the windows whined whenever they were forced open. Nothing about it was unusual. Nothing about it was threatening. But the sound came again the next night, and the night after that. By the fourth time, I knew I wasn't mistaking it. 3 slow knocks, perfectly spaced, echoing against the wood of my front door. Not frantic, not rushed, patient, deliberate. The pattern never changed. 3 knocks, silence. The air during those minutes felt altered, as though the atmosphere inside my apartment thickened, weighed down by something unseen. The ticking of the clock on my nightstand grew louder, exaggerated, until I felt each passing second crawling across my skin. Shadows stretched longer in the corners of my bedroom, gathering in places I rarely looked. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just someone drunk, someone confused, someone who had mistaken my door for another. But the regularity of it betrayed that thought. Always 2:45. Never earlier. Never later. The timing was too precise, too mechanical. The building itself didn't help. The hall outside my apartment was lined with faded green carpet, the kind that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. The light above my door flickered so often it felt intentional, as if it wanted to create shadows that shifted and breathed. When I pressed my ear against the wood after one of those knocks, I heard nothing. No footsteps retreating, no voices, no shuffle of clothing. Only silence as deep and unnatural as the dark. One night, I forced myself out of bed when the knocking came. The hallway beyond my door was empty, but the stillness was worse than finding someone there. It wasn't the stillness of a resting place, but something watchful. I stepped out into it, barefoot on the rough carpet, the cold air swallowing the warmth from my skin. My eyes adjusted, and for a moment I thought I saw movement at the far end of the hall, just a sliver of shadow shifting against the wall. But when I blinked, it was gone. After that, I began noticing changes in the atmosphere of my apartment during the day. The smell of damp would linger in the kitchen, even though I scrubbed the counters until my hands ached. The bathroom mirror occasionally fogged with condensation, though no one had showered. Sometimes, faintly, I would hear what sounded like fingernails dragging along the walls. The knocks never stopped. Always 3. Always at 2:45. I started to dread the time long before it arrived. My eyes would lock onto the red digits of the clock as they crawled closer, each minute a warning. The quiet before it happened was unbearable, like holding your breath before a plunge into deep water. Then came the sound, dull and heavy, reverberating through the frame. The sound seemed to seep into me, lodging itself somewhere beneath my ribs. I stopped opening the door. I stopped pressing my ear against it. I only lay in bed, staring into the darkness, waiting for the knocks to pass. And yet, every night they left something behind. A residue. The air carried a scent that didn't belong, like wet earth and old metal. My throat tasted of rust. Sometimes I wondered if it wasn't outside the door at all, but something inside. The knocks might not have been upon the wood separating me from the hall. but against some unseen partition, pressing in from a place I couldn't map or measure. That thought rooted itself in me, and I began to listen not just for the sound of knocking, but for the spaces between, for the breathless quiet that seemed to move closer with every repetition. One night, I woke before it happened. I don't know what stirred me, but my body was rigid, alert, as though I had been waiting for it. The clock read 2:44. My chest tightened. I could feel the seconds pulsing through my veins, each one dragging me toward the inevitable. I closed my eyes, as though denying sight would protect me from sound. Then, at the exact mark, the 3 knocks came. This time they were louder, closer. The vibration passed through the floorboards, through the mattress, through my bones. I gripped the sheets, feeling my knuckles strain, but I could not move. When the silence followed, I realized I had been holding my breath. The air returned to my lungs with a shudder, but it didn't feel like my own. The nights grew worse after that. I could sense something gathering strength, feeding off my fear. The knocks were no longer distant sounds. They carried with them an impression, pressure against the door as if something leaned there, waiting. Shadows grew thicker at the bottom of the frame, a creeping darkness that never fully dispersed, even in daylight. I started to dream. At least I thought they were dreams. I would see myself standing at the door, hand outstretched, trembling as I reached for the knob. Beyond it was always the same blackness, a void that breathed. I could feel it exhaling, cold and damp, smelling of soil freshly disturbed. When I woke, my hand would be inches from the door, fingers hovering above the brass handle. I had no memory of rising from bed. Now I wonder if there was ever a choice. The pattern was too exact, too patient. It wasn't random. It wasn't aimless. It was waiting for me to answer. Last night, the knocks changed. Not the rhythm, not the timing, but the tone. They were heavier, resonant, as though knuckles had turned to fists. The sound rattled the frame, shook the picture frames along the wall, quivered in the glass of the window. My heart raced, and in that chaos, I realized something I had never noticed before. There was a 4th knock. Soft, almost imperceptible, a faint brushing at the end, like fingertips dragging against the wood. It was no longer announcing itself. It was trying to enter. And tonight, as I write this, I cannot stop staring at the door. The clock reads 2:39. I know what is coming. My breath is already shallow, and the air feels dense, suffocating. The scent of wet earth is stronger now, as though the door has already been opened and something has spilled through the gap. I don't know if I'll be strong enough to resist. I don't know if I even want to. But I hear it already. 3 slow knocks, and that final scrape. 2:45. The sound is no longer outside. It's here. Apartment 6A. When I first moved into the building, apartment 6A was already empty. It wasn't the kind of vacancy that felt temporary, like someone was between tenants or waiting on a renovation. No, it was the sort of emptiness that lingered, heavy and untouchable, as if the room itself had grown used to silence and wanted no one to disturb it. The door to 6A sat at the very end of the corridor, a muted brown framed by chipped molding, the number half peeled from the surface. Dust gathered in the corners, no matter how often the janitor swept. The bulb above it always burned out quicker than the others, leaving the hallway cloaked in a deeper shade of shadow. Even in daylight, the door seemed darker than the rest, as though the paint had absorbed something that wouldn't wash away. I passed it often, each trip to and from my own apartment just 2 doors down. At first, I didn't think much of it. Empty rooms weren't uncommon in the building. but the air in front of 6A carried a different weight. The smell was faint, like damp plaster, like clothes forgotten too long in the washing machine. The scent crept beneath the crack of the door, thin but steady, and once noticed, it never left. Nights were the worst. My apartment walls were thin, and I could usually hear the muffled sounds of life bleeding from one home to the next. Televisions humming, cutlery clinking against plates, sometimes laughter. But beyond the wall I shared with 6A, there was nothing. No creak of floorboards, no shifting pipes, no hum of a refrigerator. Silence so complete it felt intentional. I told myself I should be grateful. At least no noisy neighbors kept me awake. But silence carries its own noises if you listen long enough. Lying awake in bed, I'd catch myself straining, my ear tuned not to the presence of sound, but to its absence. And then, faintly, I began to hear things. A thump, low and distant, like something falling. A faint scrape, as though furniture dragged across the floor. Once, I could have sworn I heard footsteps, slow, measured, pacing from one end of the apartment to the other. Always late at night, always after the building had quieted into stillness. I told myself it was impossible. I told myself it was just the building settling, wood shifting in its frame. But the sounds didn't match. They carried a rhythm, a weight, as if performed with purpose. Curiosity grew sharper than fear, and one night I stood in the corridor outside 6A, barefoot on the cold carpet, listening. The hallway smelled of old paint and the faint staleness that clung to every aged building, but as I approached the door, that other scent rose stronger. Wet cloth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. And then, so faint I almost dismissed it, a slow, steady inhale. The door felt colder than it should have, as though the air inside the apartment was several degrees lower than the rest of the building. My skin prickled, my breath shallow, and I stepped back quickly, retreating to the safety of my own door. After that, I avoided 6A as best I could, but avoidance didn't erase awareness. Passing by it each day became an ordeal, like walking past an animal you couldn't see but could feel watching. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, the shadows along the bottom of the door shifted, stretching out across the hallway carpet like smoke. The dreams came next. I dreamed I was standing inside 6A. The room was bare, stripped of furniture, the wallpaper peeling in sheets. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of soil. Shadows pooled in the corners, and though the apartment was empty, I felt surrounded. The knocking sound would start then, not at the door but from within the walls, behind me, beside me, beneath my feet. No matter where I turned, it followed. I'd wake drenched in sweat, the silence of my bedroom pressing in like a weight. Nights blurred into weeks. I stopped sleeping well, my eyes catching every flicker of shadow in my apartment, every faint sound beyond the walls. Once, while boiling water in the kitchen, I turned to find the faintest condensation fogging the window facing 6A. Letters scrawled across it in dripping lines, though by the time I blinked, the surface was clean, dry, empty. Then one night, I woke at 3 a.m. to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the creak of pipes or the shuffle of my neighbors above. It came from the hallway. A knock. 3 sharp raps, unmistakable. I froze in bed, every muscle locked, listening. Another knock followed, louder this time. Not at my door, but further down the hall. Apartment 6A. The sound echoed through the corridor, carrying with it a hollow resonance that seemed to ripple through the building's bones. My chest tightened as I realized the knocks weren't followed by footsteps or voices. Only silence. The urge to look was unbearable. Against every instinct, I pulled myself from the warmth of my bed and crept into the hall, the carpet cool beneath my feet. The corridor stretched out long and dim, the bulb above 6A flickering faintly. The door stood closed. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears, when suddenly the knob turned. Not all the way, just enough to make the metal groan. I stumbled back, pressing against my own doorframe, waiting. The knob stilled. The door remained shut. But the smell, it was stronger than ever, a sour dampness that clung to my tongue, that filled my lungs with the heaviness of rot. I retreated into my apartment, shutting and locking the door, curling against it as though my weight alone could keep it closed. Sleep never returned that night, nor has it returned in full since. Because now, every night, I hear the sounds. Not always knocks. Sometimes scraping, sometimes dragging, sometimes that slow inhale. Always at the same hour. Always from 6A. The strangest part is that, in the morning, when the building is alive again with voices and footsteps, the door looks different. Cleaner. As if someone has touched the knob, wiped away dust, disturbed the edges of the carpet just outside. But no one has lived there for years. That much I've confirmed. I asked casually, without giving myself away. The manager said the last tenant left abruptly, never came back for their things, and no one else has been placed there since. Still, the apartment feels less empty with every passing night. Sometimes I swear I see shapes moving against the curtainless windows, shadows shifting in rooms that should be vacant. And sometimes when I pass the door on my way upstairs, I feel warmth radiating from the wood, as if something inside is awake and waiting. I no longer wonder if 6A wants to be left alone. I think it wants me, and I don't know how much longer I can resist. Static on Channel 9. I grew up in a time when television wasn't just background noise. It was the pulse of a household. The old set in my living room wasn't sleek or thin, but a hulking box of wood and glass, heavy enough to demand its own corner. Its screen had that faint bluish glow even when it was off, as if it remembered the pictures it once showed. I never paid much attention to the channels it could or couldn't reach. There were plenty of dead ones, buzzing with static, snow hissing across the glass like endless rainfall. But Channel 9 was different. At first, it was just another empty frequency. White noise, no picture. I only discovered it by accident, late one night while flipping through the channels in the silence of my apartment. The hiss of static filled the room, low and steady, and for a moment I almost kept going. But then I noticed something unusual about it. The static wasn't random. I stared, confused, as the black and white snow on the screen shifted in subtle patterns. Most static is chaotic, a meaningless scatter of pixels, but this looked like something trying to form. Lines bent, shapes appeared for fractions of a second, dissolving before I could focus on them. My first thought was interference, maybe another signal bleeding through. But the longer I watched, the more certain I became that it was deliberate. It didn't just look like movement, it looked like figures. I remember leaning forward, squinting against the glow. The shapes weren't clear, not faces or bodies, but suggestions of them, like shadows twisting just out of reach. My skin prickled as I realized I wasn't just looking at a broken signal. I was watching something happen. Something happening now. The sound added to the unease. Static is usually uniform, a steady hiss, but on Channel 9 it shifted in waves. Low hums rose beneath the surface, almost like whispers buried in the static. At first, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me, straining to make sense of noise. But the cadence was unmistakable. pauses, breaths, intonations. It sounded like voices speaking just beyond understanding. I turned the set off. The glow of the screen lingered in my vision long after the room was dark. The next day I avoided it. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, the byproduct of staring too long at a dying television signal. But when night came and the apartment sank into silence, I found myself reaching for the remote again. The clock read 12:37. Channel 9 buzzed to life. This time I watched longer. The static seemed to pulse in rhythm with something, rising and falling like breath. My heart matched its tempo without meaning to. The shapes in the noise shifted more clearly now, and for a moment I swore I saw the outline of a hand pressing against the inside of the glass. Only an impression, dissolving before I could be certain, but it rooted itself in my mind. The whispers grew louder. Not words I could identify, not yet, but closer. Urgent. Every instinct told me to look away, but my body remained locked, eyes fixed on the screen. That's when the smell hit me. A faint odor filled the room, cutting through the stale air of the apartment. Dampness, mold, the metallic tang of something left to rot in water. It was impossible. Smells don't come from televisions. But the longer I watched, the stronger it became. When I turned the set off, the smell vanished instantly. I didn't sleep that night. Over the following week, the pattern continued. No matter how much I resisted during the day, night pulled me back to that channel. The time seemed to matter. If I tuned in before midnight, it was only static, ordinary, and meaningless. But past midnight, past that threshold of silence when the world outside slowed to a crawl, Channel 9 changed. The static shifted, the whispers grew louder, and the shapes pressed closer to the surface of the screen. It became ritual. I'd sit in the dark, the room lit only by the pale glow of the television, listening to the hiss that no longer sounded like noise. The whispers began forming words. Not in sentences, not at first, but fragments. My name, my address, things no television should know. The first time I heard it, I froze, every nerve alive. My name hissed out of the static, stretched and distorted, but clear. I turned the set off and sat in the silence of my apartment, heart hammering. The next night, it said it again. After that, it never stopped. Soon the shapes in the static weren't just random shadows. They became clearer. Faces, blurred but distinct, pressing closer against the glass. Eyes wide and hollow, mouths open in silent screams. Sometimes the screen would flicker to black, only to show those faces staring directly at me, as if waiting. And sometimes the faces weren't strangers. One night, I saw my own reflection staring back, distorted and grainy, mouth moving in perfect time with the whispers. Another night, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the screen, the shape was gone. The static swirled, whispering louder, almost laughing. By then, the smell was constant. The room filled with it every time the television was on. Damp soil, rust, something rotten. It clung to my clothes, to my skin. I could taste it when I swallowed. Sleep became impossible. When I closed my eyes, I dreamed in static. Endless white noise, figures moving through it, reaching for me. I woke with my ears ringing, with the taste of mold thick in my throat. I tried to stay away, I really did. But every night, I felt the pull like gravity dragging me back to the set. I'd find myself sitting on the floor in front of it, closer than before, watching shapes press harder against the glass, listening to the whispers that had become constant, insistent, demanding. They wanted me to answer. And I think I already did. Because last night, the static cleared for just a moment. The screen went black, and in that void I saw my own living room, my own body sitting on the floor in front of the television. But the figure wasn't me. Its head turned too slowly. Its eyes were wrong. Its mouth stretched wider than it should, whispering in a voice that wasn't mine. The smell was unbearable. The static returned, swallowing the image, but the impression lingered. I felt the carpet beneath me damp, as though the rot had spread from the screen into the room itself. My skin crawled with moisture, with cold. And then the television shut off on its own. The screen is dark now, but I don't trust it. The faint blue glow remains even when it's unplugged. The smell still lingers in the apartment, faint but undeniable. It isn't just static anymore. Channel 9 is waiting. And I know that tonight at 12:37, I'll be back in front of that screen, whether I want to or not. Because once you've looked long enough into the static, it looks back.